think I'll begin by introducing our speaker and welcoming some of our guests. We're actually very pleased to have several members of the advisory board of the Freeman Slogan Institute with us here to hear this seminar. It's partly the coincidence that you're speaking on the evening of their meeting, Ken, but it's also that they're very eager to hear you, as is everyone else in this room. Ken Banks is a very unusual individual, as you're going to glean from the talk, and someone who I am extremely glad and proud to have come to know. He's so many things. He's a scholar, he's an anthropologist, he's an environmentalist, he's a technologist, he's a software developer. I usually put the word gorilla in front of all those things, not gorilla with a G-O, although he actually did run a primate sanctuary in Nigeria before he got into the technology business, but gorilla with a G-U-E because of the way he kind of, in a low profile and a very humble way, just goes about doing this work in a very innovative fashion that supports the work of others rather than really promotes himself. And that is what the Frontline SMS open source software is all about, as he's going to describe. Ken began, as you can gather from what I've said, about his having worked in a primate sanctuary really as an environmentalist and as someone who was working in Africa with communities trying to protect the environment, but made a transition into technology. Was shocked to learn actually only a few days ago that when he left Nigeria in 2002 with a broken leg that was very poorly set, from his experience there, he had really never been involved in this sector, but he's quite skilled and ingenious, and he went on to found Kiwanja.net and to develop the Frontline SMS two-way text messaging mass-based field communication software we're going to hear about to empower people who are working to bring about positive political, social, economic, environmental, and other forms of change. And this has just mushroomed in very exciting ways that the world has begun to take note of. He was awarded a Stanford University Reuters Digital Vision Fellowship here in 2006, then named the PopTech Social Innovation Fellow in 2008. This year he has been named and soon will be a laureate of the Tech Awards. That's what he's doing immediately after he finishes here at Stanford. His work has been supported by the MacArthur Foundation, the Open Society Institute, the Hewlett Foundation, and I strongly suspect a lengthening list of others that we don't even know about yet. So, Ken, we're really delighted to have you here. I do want to say, for those of you who are here at Stanford, actually we've induced Ken to stick around for the next week, the remainder of this week and all next week. So if you're on campus, you want to talk to him, you've got friends who want to talk to him, just come up to him afterwards or send him an email, and he's willing to talk to you. But now he'll talk to all of us. Ken.
Right. Thank you, Larry. It's great to be here, and it's an honour. I met Joshua and Larry a while ago, and it's great to take an interest in my work in this way at a time when it's mobile technology is really on the rise in many areas. Larry's done a very good job of kind of describing my background. It's about 25 years in IT. It's 16 years working on and off in Africa. It's 6.5 years in mobile. It's combined with a degree in social anthropology and a general kind of attention disorder, which means that I can't stick at one thing for very long. But I think that's worked out quite well for me, so I'm quite happy. My mum was horrified when I kept changing direction. And when I was thinking about coming here, I was thinking, well, should I talk about conservation and the use of mobile technology in conservation, which, as Larry says, is one of my passions? Didn't seem quite so relevant. Or talk more broadly about how mobile technology is impacting the work of non-profits in developing countries. But they were sort of a little bit too far out of it on the basis of what Liberation Technologies is trying to do, and I think the people in this room are trying to think out. So I thought what I'd do is I'd start off with just a brief 5-10 minute talk about the kinds of things that are happening in developing countries with mobile technology, and very, very very low-level entrepreneurship. What happens when a mobile phone mast appears in a village? Because it's pretty amazing what suddenly starts to happen around it. I'll also talk about FrontlineSMS, the software I developed. I'll explain what it is and what it's doing in a political sense. I won't go into all the other health and environmental and other sort of areas. I'll just concentrate on the political ones. And also just talk about how we build mobile tools that work in the kind of places where we really want to try and encourage and foster positive social change. And many of those places are a little bit out of reach. They might be on the margins technologically. There might be all sorts of issues, people working in isolation. And I think we need to think about how we build stuff that helps those people. So I'll give you a few tips about the work that I've done and the things I think we need to think about when we're building mobile tools. I like maps. This is Korea. Capital of North Korea is that little dot in the top half. You can guess where the military live and where everyone else is hanging around. If we also look at the world by night, we can get a good sense of where electrification is reached, but also, in a sense, where the development is. There's lots of very, very dark parts of Africa. If you actually put that African map over a map around about 1860, 1870, you would be surprised to see, in fact, that a lot of the areas nobody had mapped because no one knew what was there, do almost match some of the areas where there's no light there. So it's quite an interesting thing to do. If we look at mobile technology, this is a late last year map of coverage across the African continent. Most of my work's been in Africa, but the software I developed and my interest in mobile is global. But just got a personal attachment to the African continent, I tend to focus on that. It's an interesting map. You can see there's some pretty well packed out areas. East Africa, Kenya, Uganda has got very good coverage. South Africa, 98% of the population live in coverage areas. You have Nigeria that's doing pretty well. Up in North Africa, Morocco is pretty well covered, and a few other places. There's a lot of desert, obviously, so you need to bear in mind there are lots of places where people aren't living. And what I like to do when I look at these maps is think about what does that actually mean on the ground. A really nice example is look in Nigeria. It's kind of up through the G. There's a line that goes up to the centre of Nigeria. That's the road to Abuja. And there's this mobile phone coverage the whole way because of the amount of trade that goes on. So you can get a really good understanding or a really good sense by looking at these maps. But when you actually go to the countries and start to see what's happening, for me it breaks down into these two sectors. We have this kind of formal sector where everything's done neatly, and we have the informal sector where things just randomly spring up. So formal, people in shops, glass cabinets, mobile phones, you get a receipt, you pay tax, everything is done absolutely spot on, you hope. Or you get a hotel, you buy SIM cards, and basically you can get onto the local network very, very easily. The reason this is important is that if the things that are happening here weren't happening, then the phones wouldn't be in the hands of the people we're trying to help. So this is the backdrop to the other stuff I want to talk about. But then there's the informal stuff. We have people that throw up shops because they realise there's a bit of money to be made out of selling mobile phones in their village. And that must be the hottest mobile phone shop. I wouldn't want to spend much time in there, but someone has just decided that's something they want to do. We have these charging stations where people are making money by people going up, plugging their phone in for 20 minutes, waiting, getting a bit of a charge, and then paying a small amount of money and leaving. People are feeding their families and running businesses on this model. And this isn't a manual that's been downloaded off the web. There's no kind of rules to much of this. People are just figuring it out. This guy's just bolted loads of sockets onto a piece of wood and just bought a charger for almost every model of phone you can think of. And he just sits there, and he's listening to a wind-up radio as well. So there's another little IT segment in that picture. You have phone technicians who repair phones. I don't know why this one's called the giant phone technician, but they all have amazing names. And with a brick and a block of wood, they can fix your phone. It's incredible. You wouldn't take your iPhone there, perhaps, but they can get things going that otherwise wouldn't work. They can replace screens and keypads, and they can just box stuff together. And again, it's just purely entrepreneurial. These people rarely have any electronics experience at all. They just figure it out. And if you're unlucky, maybe your phone will be one they learn on. But ultimately, they will get it right. Then you have these bikes rolling around. This is a mobile. This guy just gets stopped in the street. People make a call, and then he carries on his journey. This is a desk-based mobile phone. They're very popular in many areas because they're more sturdy, battery life is longer, and they're harder to run away with. So if someone's making a phone call, they can't bolt it and run off with your phone. It's got a spare battery up there as well. I met this guy by talking about Premiership football, Manchester United and Chelsea. It's the best way anywhere in the world to get to strike up a conversation with anybody. It's just like you can buy Coca-Cola everywhere, you can watch Manchester United pretty much everywhere. four-wheel versions. This one's Peru. They all have strange country names. Again, absolutely no idea where they come from. But these people, again, they ride around and they make money by people stopping them making calls. It begs the question, when you look at these things, what will happen when everybody's owning a phone? Because there won't be so much need for this. But right now, it is very relevant. You see people standing in traffic lights and on street corners selling top-up cards and cigarette lighter chargers and all sorts of manner of things. And there are a lot of people doing this, a lot of people feeding their families and sending their kids to school by doing this. When I was in Uganda working with Grammy 2 and a bit years ago, I found a report by the Ugandan Telecommunications Commission, and they estimated about 6,500 people were officially employed in Uganda in the ICT industry, and probably 6,000 are employed in mobile. If we add up these people and the other stuff you've just seen, they estimated 350,000 people doing that. So there were 333 or whatever, 340,000 people just randomly making a living off this out of their own entrepreneurial spirit and just their own vision to try and make money. And often people look at developing countries and they just see them as people sort of sitting around waiting for things to happen. And it really is not true, particularly with mobile. This guy was amazing. He charged this battery up in the nearest village to him that had power and took it back to his village where there wasn't power. And then people plugged their phones in to charge them up. Car batteries are not light. They're very, very heavy and they're very, very determined to actually do this. But again, it's just, hey, people have phones in my village, they can't charge them. What can I do about it? Another shop with air conditioning, a few other things being sold in there, slightly more upmarket version of the metal one. And this is a village phone. This is the model that Grammy pioneered in Bangladesh initially, where women usually borrow a small amount of money, buy a phone, and become the village phone in their area. And what's interesting about this picture is a couple of things. Because mobile ownership is obviously on the rise in many areas, fewer and fewer people need to make a call on the village phone. So it's becoming a little bit less of a lucrative business. So they're selling bread and sweets and sugars in the background. Also, there's a wire attached here. What this lady had done, because there were about 20 village phones in her street, all with the same rates, because you can't charge a lower rate, it's all fixed. To make her service stand out, she decided to allow her customers to go to the back of her shop to make a phone call in private. Quite what often happens is somebody starts making a phone call and kids show up, and it becomes a bit of a spectacle, and you've got absolutely no privacy. But to stop her customers running away with her phone, she had this wire attached, which was attached to her, and basically the phone couldn't go very far. And that was how she basically stood out from the competition. Again, slightly random, but it was very effective. And mobile phone manufacturers as well are also getting in on the act. They're starting to observe all this very, very interesting behaviour. This is one of my favourite pictures. The CNN actually used this in a website article last week. It's an advert for a torch, but oh, by the way, it makes phone calls as well, in case you want to make a phone call. And this is for people who don't have power at home, who need to find their way around, and it's predominantly aimed at that market. It's very, very clever. Even the name, Katorchi, doesn't really say much about mobile phones at all. And it just shows how innovation is turning in that direction. In India, this was a spice phone. There's no screen on this. This is a braille keypad. It presses, as you press the buttons, it reads out the numbers. But it basically is for people who are visually impaired or blind, or for low-income earners who can't afford a phone. You can't text on this. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's not ideal. And I'm not sure if it's really taken off. Because this was being sold for around about $20, and now Nokia and other manufacturers are selling fully fledged phones with internet access and other stuff, colour screens for the same price. So the price is certainly not quite there. So with all this stuff going on, there's a lot of excitement about mobile technology helping people get out of poverty by getting market prices and being able to report abuse and domestic violence and help monitor elections and get better health care and all these kinds of things. And there is some really amazingly positive stuff out there, which seems to indicate that mobile technology is actually creating a lot of very, very positive social change. But for non-profits working in these areas and working in the communities where these phones are appearing, it's not all necessarily great. To me, there's two sides to this. We have centralised and decentralised. If you talk to people today about mobile solutions, if you're following IT, everything's about the cloud. It's about having your email in the cloud so you can access it anywhere. It's about having your patient records in the cloud. It's about having stuff on Flickr. Everything's stored in a central location, which is usually far, far away from where you are. And the reality is, for non-profits working in many small, remote, rural areas, there's no way they can connect to that. There's no internet connectivity. There's nothing on the mobile network. They're totally decentralized. And that's really a big problem. I'll tell you a story about elephants. this is going back to 2003, and this sort of highlights I think for me, the need for us to be focusing on providing tools to people who are actually on the ground in the area where the problem is, and not just somewhere where they can connect to all this fancy technology. I was speaking to communities as part of a project for Kruger National Parks, and they were looking to set up an elephant alert system. And we were trying to figure out what they could do and how they could do it. And some of the community were sort of speaking to me, and they said, why are they setting up an elephant alert system in Johannesburg to tell us when an elephant's escaped the park, when we're in our fields all day and we're the first people to know an elephant's broken out? Why can't we tell our communities when an elephant's broken out? Where is the sense in that? And it's actually an incredibly valid point, and it really resonated with me very, very strongly at that time, that we were building tools that didn't work in the right places. Another good example, think about election monitoring. You usually have, and it's all very valid, and there's a need for everything here, but you normally have the international community going into an area, monitoring an election. It's all done with, monitor on the t-shirts, it's all done very officially. In the case of Nigeria, usually only the bad places are monitored because people don't think that good news is particularly news when they're monitoring an election. But how about asking the population who are voting what it was like and what problems they have? How about adding some citizen voice to the election monitoring process? Sounds like a great idea, but without the right technology, that can't happen. This is the mobile ecosystem as I see it. We have a couple of areas. Up here we have expensive, high-tech, infrastructure-heavy, fairly lengthy lead time training for-profit models. These are systems aimed at governments, international NGOs, people with time, money, resources, and expertise to make big systems work. And then down here we have the scrappy stuff. Cheap or free, very easy to get going, it doesn't require much infrastructure, very quick to adopt, and it's generally non-profit. And down in this space here, when I started in mobile 6.5 years ago, it became very, very apparent that there weren't enough people building stuff down here. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One, most of the non-profits who work on the ground in rural areas don't have much money, so they probably can't pay for much, if anything. Also, they're so sort of far away from anything, it's hard to find them, it's hard to reach out to them, it's hard to promote stuff to them, it's hard to really communicate with these sort of non-profits. And I think that's why nobody had really been thinking too much about doing that. But for me, there's a huge gap, and I saw so much really positive change going on, whether it was conservation, environmental, social, whatever it might be, going on in these rural areas, but no tools seemed to work where these people were working. So my answer was this. This piece of software, is a piece of software called FrontlineSMS. Basically what it is, it's a piece of software you put onto a computer. It can be Apple, Mac, Windows or Linux, but most people that I've worked with in the rural areas have they're Windows-based because of various reasons. A cheap phone and a cable that you plug into the computer, or you could use a modem if you've got a bit of extra money. And what that does is it allows you to run a two-way communication system from anywhere there's a mobile phone signal. All you need is power and a mobile phone signal. So you can send things like health information, job alerts, security alerts, market prices out to communities that you're working with in the field. And you can also get feedback from people. And this is crucial. People can actually respond. Radio stations can use this to have a doctor in the studio for a day talking about health, and people can text in questions and answers to be read out over the radio. So that return path is crucial. You can also use it for election monitoring. People can text in observations around elections, or you can carry out surveys. This is what it looks like in principle. That is it. It is a computer and a cable and a phone.
Just to clarify, when you say the feedback is by radio and so on, that's also by text, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's all text-driven, yeah. Radio is still the best way. Have questions afterwards? Is that easier? We can do questions as we go.
There's an urgent question.
Any urgent questions, wait, no. Otherwise, yeah, hold on to it. Thanks. On the radio thing, radio is still the best way by an absolute mile to get information out to rural communities in developing countries. Nothing really else comes close. Mobile technology is very useful, but what it does when you put it together with radio is one way. With mobile phones, people can respond. It actually really, really enhances it. And it's some really exciting stuff can be going on with that. And I listen to people who are doing some very exciting work. The roots of the software were conservation. It was going back to that elephant story and going back to working in Kruger National Parks. And they weren't activism, but the interesting thing was the first 2 years after releasing the software, it was almost exclusively seen as an activist tool. I can explain a bit more about that in a few minutes. This is where I was working. This is Bushbuck Ridge. It's an area on the edge of Kruger National Park. where about 85 odd years ago, the relatives of these people were thrown out of the park onto this dust bowl, and they try and eke out a living. And it's pretty tough. These women spend most of their day just queuing up for water, and then they collect it, and the next day they go back. And Kruger National Parks were trying to figure out how they could re-engage these people in conservation, how they could send messages out to them to inform them what was going on with the park, to ask their opinions, and to really speak to them. And mobile phones were starting to appear around this time. 2004, 2005, phones were starting to get into the hands of people like this. And many people thought that would never happen, but it's clearly now it's gone a long way. And I couldn't find any software that they could use that would actually allow them to send messages to all these people and get replies anywhere where the internet didn't exist. You cannot get on the internet there. You couldn't in 2004, and I would say you're very, very lucky if you can today. It's just not an option. When I released the software in 2005, I knew Kruger National Parks had a need, and I had a hunch that there were probably more NGOs working on the margins who wanted to communicate with communities through SMS, and there weren't the tools to do it. So I just built the software in 5 weeks, very, very quickly, rapid prototyping, threw it out on the website, and just sat back and just got on with my day job. And what's happened since is that it's actually spurned an amazing array of projects, and it's a really interesting, I think, way of looking at empowerment in these senses. So this is a quote in the Africa Journal for an article I did an interview for recently, a couple of years ago now. And this really neatly summarises what the software actually does for people. And when you look at what it's doing in the field, it does seem to be genuinely doing this. A bit like me, the software's got a slight attention disorder, so it really does so many different things. And people say to me, when it's used for election monitoring, how different is that version than the one that's used to develop an alert? Well, it's not. It's the same tool. It's just a very, very general tool. I think there's a danger of trying to build things that are too specific. So I've got about 6 sort of political type examples of uses, just because this is the kind of topic I think we want to talk about here. 2007, Nigerian elections. A loose coalition of 5 Nigerian NGOs wanted to monitor their elections because they were sick and tired of people coming in and picking all the bad areas and really not asking the people what their thoughts and what their experiences were of taking part in the election. And they obviously used software so people could text in their observations and they could push the number out. The BBC picked up on this, thankfully for them and thankfully for me, because after this MacArthur stepped in and actually gave me my first bit of funding. So I owe a lot to these Nigerians, despite the fact they tried to kill me in 2002. But this story was really interesting because it allowed this loose coalition to do something no one else had really done before. And it's believed to be the first time that African citizens have helped to monitor their own election. That's incredibly empowering. If you look now at what's happening with elections in developing countries, almost every election is now monitored by independent groups using different sorts of technology. But as Clay Shirky said in a recent talk at the State Department, that this was kind of pioneered around about this time, and heaven forbid was pioneered by the Nigerians, because no one else had really thought about doing this. Zimbabwe was the first ever user after about 2 weeks when I released the tool in October 2005. And when you start to unpick and work with activist organisations, you realise that they are genuinely or generally quicker at coming on and adopting new technologies because their lives depend on it, or they're working in very, very dodgy areas where they can't afford to be caught, or they have to remain under the radar. The beauty of FrontlineSMS for the Zimbabwean NGOs was they could set up a 2-way messaging hub under their beds without needing to speak to anybody. You don't have to speak to the local mobile operator, you just buy a SIM card, you put it in the phone, and you have a 2-way group messaging system. Suddenly they could get information out to rural areas they couldn't do before. Suddenly rural communities could take stuff back in and say what was happening where they were. It's incredibly stealthy, and you can carry it around if you want to, and if the police come knocking on your door, you can just put a hammer through the laptop, and all the data's gone. So it's been very interesting seeing how it's being used there. It's still being used in Zimbabwe today. This is a campaign that one of the NGOs ran early last year during the delayed election results, when there's a lot of uncertainty, as there always seems to be. And things were so bad, people didn't really know if they could get any worse. But things continually seem to get worse. And they reached out and said, what are your thoughts for a future Zimbabwe? How do you feel about the future of your country? When all this trouble's over and things go back to normal, what do you want to see? And these were messages of hope. These are just a few. But speaking with the NGOs after, people felt amazingly empowered to be able to have a voice, to even just say these things, because they couldn't before. So again, simple SMS opening up these channels can be hugely empowering. In Afghanistan, it's being used to send security alerts to field workers who are running around Helmand province and other fairly dodgy areas who are trying to help rebuild the country and do humanitarian work. And I think when it comes down to these kind of really critical uses of SMS or text messaging, or my software in particular, but not alone, it makes you realise how important this stuff can be. When I blogged about this last year, I didn't name the NGO because I was uncomfortable doing it. They actually allowed me to name them, but I decided not to. And the day I was blogging about it, two female Red Cross workers got killed at a roadblock. And all hell was let loose. But the NGO using the software, and there are now a few, I think, in Afghanistan using it, were able to alert all their staff very, very quickly to avoid certain areas and to lay low until they got a message. And that's kind of really quite a crucial use, I think. In Iraq, Azraq al-Iraq, the first independent news agency since the fall of Saddam, are using the software to disseminate news around the country and to bordering countries. Now, they did start speaking to local operators, but local operators really only want to speak to you if you're going to do 1 million messages a week and you've got a lot of money. And they didn't have that. So they were getting quite tired after 6 months of nothing happening. And somebody who used to work for Internews, heard about FrontlineSMS, and he installed it there, and they're using it all the time now. It's their solution. And they have keywords set up so reporters can text in certain keywords and get automatic responses with up-to-date news. And it's an interesting use, I think, of the software in an area which is still obviously reconstructing after what happened there. In Azerbaijan, it was used to mobilize the youth during last year's presidential elections. Again, some small grassroots NGOs were very, very keen to use mobile phones with young people to try and encourage them to take part in the democratic process because they were generally apathetic. Unfortunately, not every country has a Barack Obama who can somehow stir up all the passion and get people off their backsides. But this actually worked for them, and they're looking to do more and more campaigns now based on SMS and young people and politics. Pakistan, a year and a half again, 2 years ago, during a state of emergency when General Musharraf was locking up all the High Court judges, there were bloggers who were getting a little bit scared about blogging what was going on because they were being reported by the internet service providers and being locked up in some cases. So they used text messaging to get the information out of the country. It was texted to Bahrain of all places. As I discovered, Bahrain has a fairly large Pakistani expat community, and they could blog safely from there. So the information was sent in small chunks by SMS and was blogged from a safe place. I was on Skype one day and just got this message appeared on my screen, and it was people doing this. And I don't know who they were, or where they are, or anything. I don't know anything about them. Sometimes it's safer not to know. But The Economist picked up on the use of mobile technology in activist circles and highlighted the use of it during this article. Afghanistan, again, during the elections last month, I guess it must have been, FrontlineSMS was used in conjunction with a tool called Ushahidi, which is a crowdsourcing system that allows you to crowdsource information and visualize it on a map. So this is a map here. The bigger the dots, the more stuff's going on. People could report by email or by web form or by SMS when they saw something happening in the election they felt shouldn't be happening. So they could report indiscrepancies and so on. This was quite successful. The BBC picked up on this, and some very large NGOs who are also doing monitoring work also got very interested in the fact that they were bringing in a new voice, a different voice into the monitoring process in Afghanistan. It was all lined up to be reused next week, I believe. I mean, it was supposed to be the rerun, but of course that's not now happening. But again, it seems a really interesting use of a technology in a place where technology is generally hard to get to work because the internet, you probably can't get on the internet in many places, but there is mobile phone signal. And then finally, during Obama's visit to Ghana, the State Department used it among a number of tools to send information to local people who expressed an interest in knowing when Obama's speech was going to be and things like that. So I think millions of messages were sent out. 1 or 2 embassies used FrontlineSMS just as a local tool to disseminate information. So you have a very wide range of users. You kind of have the bigger, more established users, maybe State Department or international NGOs, although they're not my target. And then you have, right down the end, you have these very, very loose coalitions of people who just want to do something, and they want a tool to do it. Software's been downloaded all over the place. There's a map. There's multiple things on each space, but there's some interesting projects in the US, lots in East Africa. We're still trying to figure out what this really means. We're still needing to get funding more than anything really to start to analyze and dig in and say, how many of these users actually ended up using it successfully? How many had problems? What were the problems? And how can we make it better? We don't really have time and resources to do that. This is the online community. We have an online community of people to reach out and ask questions and get help. What I love about this is when I get up in the morning and I see a user in El Salvador has helped a user in Kenya, I smile as I eat my Weetabix, because that's exactly what we want to create. We want to create a self-supporting community of users who all have an interest in helping each other out, and knowing that if I help him, maybe there'll be a time when I need help from him. So, how do we get stuff that works like this? And obviously I'm speaking from my own perspective and my own technology, but over the last 6.5 years working in mobile, and the last 4 years working on this software, we kind of picked up a few things that we need to consider when we're building tools. So, first of all, build something that works on the equipment that's available to the people on the ground who you want to use it. So, forget iPhones, if you're working in rural developing countries, forget Android, forget all the fancy stuff, forget broadband connectivity, forget all that. Think about the stuff that's available to them. Cheap computers, cheap phones, SMS, maybe internet connectivity if you're lucky, voice certainly, but it's of course hard to use voice because it can't be indexed and do other things. If people have to put stuff together and build stuff, make it easy. Do the IKEA test, although maybe IKEA is not the best example. I always end up with extra screws and bits of wood left over. But if they have to plug stuff in, make it make sense to them. When people look at a FrontlineSMS installation, I don't need to tell them how it's working. They see a laptop, a cable, and a phone. Oh, okay. It sends messages through the phone. It's very simple. It doesn't need to be explained. Think about the price of it. Think about whether or not people can pay, and if they can pay, there's maybe a problem getting the money off of them. But ideally make it free or make it affordable. Don't price people out of the solution. There's a bit of a slightly sensitive debate in mobile healthcare where there are for-profit solutions. And some people see it as being a little bit immoral to be making profit from healthcare systems in developing countries. And I won't go into that debate, but it's something to think about. Also, how do you replicate use? If NGO A in Nairobi is using it, how does NGO B in Nairobi get to hear about it and then do the same thing? How easily can that happen? One of the beauties of the work we've done with FrontlineSMS is that it's so easy to get the software onto a computer and to start playing around with it. The NGOs go to conferences or they meet up in bars or they just talk generally, and they say, if you try FrontlineSMS, go to the website, leave the form, get a link, put it on the computer, buy a phone, and you're off. And I think the reason that map is so spread is that it's actually very, very easy to copy what other people have done. Forget the internet. Some people don't like saying that, but there's two things I generally assume in any of the work I do. First, assume no technical ability among your users if you're working with small grassroots NGOs. Now, it's not to belittle them, because many are very smart and very clever and very motivated. But if they don't need technical skills to make your tool work, you've got a very good chance it's going to be used. If it doesn't need the internet, you've got a very good chance it will be used. Provide people the ability to connect and communicate with other users if they can get to a place where they can do that. And we managed to do that through our website. We have 820 odd members of that site now, out of about 4,100 downloads as at around about today. So 1 in 5 people are joining the online community, which again for me is a very high percentage. 20% is pretty high. Also, when you're thinking about the solutions and thinking about building stuff, I love this cartoon, get outside the techie box, get out of the social sciences box, and get out of a sort of predefined space and think in a multidisciplinary fashion. Some of the really cool stuff is being done because anthropologists have done research and figured stuff out, or people are stepping from the technical box and they're getting out in the field and they're getting their hands dirty, and they're maybe doing primate conservation or doing health. So technology really comes at the end of everything. And I think my study of anthropology in 1996, I never really knew why I did it other than the fact it was interesting at the time. But now when I look back, it was actually a bit of a masterstroke in a way, because today so many people are working very hard to understand how people interact with technology. And anthropology is very good at getting your mind in a way of doing that. Appropriate technology, the word is used a little bit too much, I think. It's a bit like sustainable development. People don't really quite know what they mean anymore when they use the term. But this is a book I read at university, 1973, Small is Beautiful, Fritz Schumacher. It was the first book that popularised the appropriate technology movement. And it was basically promoting things that put things in areas, supply things, build things, so that they can be maintained and used efficiently and effectively in the areas that they're meant to work. So don't take tractors to rural communities and leave them there and have no spares or no one trained to fix the tractor. When I first went to Zambia in '93, I was amazed how many tractors there were all in the field rusting. And there was a USA project, apparently, it could be anybody, but the tractors we used, they broke down, and nobody had spares, no one knew how to fix them, and they just got left. So there's a lot more than just about providing technology. There's a lot of things around it. Collaborate, don't compete. This kid looks like he's got 4 eyes, but I actually blogged this because I've almost envisaged sometimes in the spaces I've worked, we have 2 NGOs pulling on the arm of the child because they both want to give the child a vaccination, and they're just kind of rushed to be doing the stuff. And I don't see enough collaboration. It's used a lot, the word's used a lot, but it's very hard to find genuine collaboration that actually makes sense to people on the ground. So, with all the stuff I've done and looking at those little tips of what I've built, there's a very, very quick video here. It's about 2 minutes long. I just want to show you. This is a user of FrontlineSMS in the Philippines who sent this video in randomly, which was great. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it, but there's subtitles if you're not able to. So for 6 years he's doing this clinic on his own back, going out to rural areas, giving this health service. This is just his journey he's taking us through now. And probably for 6 years he'd show up when people weren't ready, they weren't there, they were in the field, and he wasn't really maximising his time. The last 6, 8, 9 months ago, he somehow heard about FrontlineSMS. I've got no idea how. He's installed it on his little computer there. He's got the numbers of the clinic, people who are running the clinics in different areas, and he now texts ahead of time and he mobilises the people. And it's a really, really classic example of basically a long-tail user. It's somebody who people aren't really building tools for these people to use because it doesn't really make sense. Everyone's building big stuff that works in the health centres, the big health centres, not small stuff like this. At the end there, you'll see the guy, the scared guy, doing this. It's a little bit scared. He's doing this actually. This is one of my favourite pictures. A friend, Eric Hirschman, took this. This is a picture of a Kenyan school child. He's doing a version of the FrontlineSMS logo, which is arms up in the air. White and Kennedy, who do Nokia's local branding, and Nike and Adidas, all these global brands, they pretty much work for free for us. They like what we were doing. They came up with this textable logo for a piece of texting software, /o/. It's quite clever in a geeky kind of marketing sort of way. And we're seeing on Twitter now and on blogs people saying testing, using, and it's, some people look and go, what the hell's that? But people know what that means in many of the circles I operate in. And getting users now sending in pictures of them with their arms outstretched, looking all very excited and motivated about using the software. And it's kind of interesting that that's actually happening there. It's sort of caught on a little bit. A few people have tried it. Not everyone's had success. This guy tried it. Didn't quite work for him. So right at the end, I just want to go back to this slide, and this is where really my mobile work started. And just every week or every month, when I sort of look back at what I managed to do that month or week, if I haven't got any closer to building tools that actually help the organisations working with people like this, I should stop. Because at the end of the day, the one thing we're measured by is whether or not we have a positive impact on the lives of these types of people. So, without getting caught up in all the high tech and the wonderful technologies and the politics and all the money of the space, I think it's really important that we just stay really, really focused on why we started doing this stuff in the first place. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much. I have badges, by the way. I have badges with that wonderful logo. If you want to come and grab a badge, there's something. Okay, so anybody have any questions?
Do you know who is talking to you? When you send out a message and you get text back, do you know where it's coming from?
you know the number of the sender. So the number always goes with the message. You might not know who the number is associated with, but you know, and you at least get the number so you can find out.
Do you have location information? Some sort of
SMS doesn't carry any location information. So when you crowdsource stuff, you have to get the person sending the text to say where they are. And if they don't, you have to send a text back and say, sorry, can you tell us where you were. There are some online services, as one called Clickatel, which is a global messaging gateway that British Airways use and some of the big companies, where you can put a name rather than a number on the message. So when it arrives on your phone, it will say from Ken Banks or from Stanford. But you have to register that text string with them, and they have to be sure that you are who you say you are. Otherwise, I could register US Embassy Kabul and start causing all sorts of mayhem. And there's generally a bit more trust associated to seeing that string rather than a number. If I get a message from a number I don't recognise, do I believe or trust that? But if it says it's something that I recognise, I might well trust it.
Going back to the Filipino doctor, he goes out on, if somebody calls him, it's limited information he can get. I just want to know how it works. You can tell him what pills he needs, what medication, but can he represent a EKG or something more graphic on the SMS signal? Or how does that happen?
Right, so all he does with the SMS is he mobilises the community. So there's obviously somebody in a remote clinic or a little doctor's surgery somewhere who's holding medicines. He will then restock them. So he will communicate with them for that. And he'll also tell them when he's going to be there so the community can be mobilised and people will be ready for him when he comes. SMS is very, very limited. You can't do any imagery through it. It's 160 characters maximum. It's generally quite expensive, the amount of data that you can send. But in many cases, it's all there is. So for him, it's just basically allowed him to be more efficient. For 5.5 years, he's probably maybe only running at 40% effectiveness. But now at least he can get people organised in advance of arriving. And people can contact him in emergencies as well. If there was some really big disaster of some kind. There are quite a lot of very interesting help applications for FrontlineSMS. But I've kind of cut them out here because it wasn't quite so relevant for this discussion. But it is running rural healthcare networks where community healthcare workers can get information from the hospital, and the hospital can order care and phone for help and do all sorts of stuff.
We had a presentation on
Right.
FrontlineSMS Medic in someplace. Someplace in the room.
And do you need authorization? Does the state give you authorization for deployment because you're using the signals in a particular way? Or
No. Yeah, the beauty is you can have it running in 10 minutes and you could be sending and receiving messages. Whether or not you should be doing that is a different matter, but you don't need to speak to anyone to do that. Okay.
What are the next big things that you want to do?
Get rich.
That's one.
I know that isn't true.
Well, we're adding new features to the software. So right now it basically works without the web. So you don't need the internet to do anything with it. But clearly the internet is arriving in many places. So we're starting to add functionality that allows you to make use of the internet. So we're adding picture messaging in a couple of months. So you can transmit short video, pictures and sound, which will open up some multimedia potential. And maybe the question you asked about the touch thing, you can do it then with that. We're launching a website next year which will allow people to connect with these users and help fund their use of the software. So one of the biggest challenges most of these users have, like Lyndon Battlelord, he pays for those messages. No one's funding him. And someone really should be helping him. If he's doing good, I think we should figure out ways of helping him. So we're building a website. We're working with Accenture, who've given us a consultant for free. I think my funding would probably hire him for a day on his usual rate, but we're getting him for free. And GSM Association are working with us, and Wyman Kennedy, who do all our branding. And we can launch a site maybe in 6 months, which will allow you to seek out these users and actually directly support their SMS sending. So you can actually directly support those things. That's probably as far as I've got. I've got funding for another year, so I suppose maybe having some more funding coming a bit easier would be nice. But in the long term, I don't really think that far ahead, because I think the reason I've got to where I am is I can react very quickly. I found a Nigerian primate job 2 weeks before I went to Nigeria. I just had nothing to do for a while. So I think not having a mortgage and not being too settled and not being too fixed on a big plan has meant I can adapt more quickly.
Have there been instances where people have used it for the wrong reasons? And if yes, how do you tackle them?
There's always one person asks that question.
There's always one in this seminar.
Yes,
One or another.
I'm not aware of any bad uses. But then I think, as I was explaining to Larry yesterday, I think for me, it's more about if I see someone using something I don't agree with, through some religious belief, then do I intervene or just let it go? I think a really good example of how this can get messy was last year in the US. Verizon blocked the use of a shortcode on their network to a pro-abortion group who wanted to help people who wanted to seek abortion advice. And Verizon said, oh, no, that's not, we can't let our network be used for that. And it caused a bit of a stink, because it was, well, who are you to say that pro-abortion is wrong? At what point do you decide? So, for me, there's not been a huge amount. There was a Sri Lankan group, Sri Lankan gay and lesbian rights group, that were using it to support the community in Sri Lanka, and apparently it's still illegal in Sri Lanka to be gay. So, whether or not I agree with homosexuality or not, do I say no, we can't use it for that? It's disgusting. So I tend to try and step back. In terms of terrorist use and really big stuff, completely no idea. I suspect it probably hasn't. But I'll probably answer that question this way. I'm sure there's Taliban manuals stored as PDFs, and I'm sure Adobe don't spend too much time worrying about the use of Adobe PDF Maker to make a manual on how to make a bomb. So I would say that I would hope the positive use would always outweigh the negative use. Our faith in human spirit, that would be the case. But if someone wants to use it for a bad thing, I think it will be a dilemma, because we might have to start controlling distribution then. And the reason this has worked so well is it's actually been able to spread very, very easily and quickly.
Would you even have any way to pull it right on somebody who's using it in a way that you can control?
Well, we thought about being able to remotely deactivate people, but it felt a bit too big brother. The software is open source, so someone can just take the bits out that do that anyway. So we just decided not to.
Does it mean that you still have connectivity to your server after downloading the software?
There's no connection. So once the software is downloaded from our server, that's the end of it for us. It runs on a standalone machine.
So the remote deactivation.
It would be through, it would be probably through SMS. So what we'd do is when you first use the software, it would maybe actually text us their number. And then we'd associate that with the user. If we read something about somebody bad in Afghanistan doing something, we could send an SMS to our software, which would then basically kill it. But it all sounds very mission impossible. The laptop would self-destruct after 15 seconds and all sorts of crazy stuff, so we kept away from that. Okay.
Sorry, I have a very fundamental question. I was wondering, some of these villages that there is a shortage of power, for instance, how do you empower the laptop, for instance?
Well, you do it in the same way that people charge the phones, really. I mean, it obviously is a problem, and I think non-profits who are working in areas where there is no power generally don't think too much about using this kind of technology because it's not something they can really consider using. What I found with most of the users that I'm in touch with is they've actually got to the point where they understand what mobile can do for them, and they've seen what it can do, and they've been speaking to people and reading things, and they look at our solution and they realise it runs off a computer and needs a phone and needs a mobile signal. And
so
if
you're
they don't have
referring to NGOs actually, or the populace within the village?
Well, I mean, we supply it to NGOs, but there are people who are using it who aren't NGOs. So I guess we're quite vague on that. There are people. There's a guy in Oklahoma who set up an SMS helpline for women who suffer domestic violence. He's not a non-profit. He's just I think it's Oklahoma, but he's just somebody who's concerned about the fact that there's too much domestic violence. And the scary thing about that project was within 2 months they got 4,000 text messages from women, and there's clearly a problem there. So individuals can use this as well. Somebody running something out of their bedrooms, an activist who's just incredibly passionate about something can use the software. But with the power thing, most non-profits, they don't really come to us until they know they can get the bits to work. Occasionally I get an email and it says, there's no mobile phone signal in our village.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, I'd love to be able to help, but I just cannot do that. Go speak to Safaricom or MTN and that type of thing. So the prerequisites are very low for use, but with the laptop we are trying to remove that from the equation. So in about a month we're launching a USB stick version of the software. So you can go to an internet cafe, plug in a USB stick, do your messaging, unplug it and go. So that's lowering the barrier a little bit more. And thinking about building a version that runs on a phone,
Right.
a smartphone.
Yeah.
So, the laptop is probably the most uncomfortable bit for me, or the computer. But it hasn't stopped us so far, and I think we can slowly keep reducing that barrier. It will get easier for people.
Thank
I've
you.
lost a sense of order here, but I'll just go here and I'll get back there.
As you expand SMS Frontline, medic, or the domestic violence, have you given thought about how to keep privacy about patient data or women's names or someone using it for research?
Yeah, that's easy for me to answer because they are my projects, so I don't get involved in that. So what I generally do, I have faith that the non-profit doing the work will be aware of any issues there might be around what they're doing. A good example is in Zimbabwe. If you work in Zimbabwe and you're not careful with your data, you end up in a nasty prison. So it's in their interest to do it right. So FrontlineSMS Medic and now a project called Credit, which is now using microfinance. These people are generally more expert in the fields they're adapting software for, and they're the ones that will decide how to tackle those problems. The beauty for me is I see myself as more than an enabler for this stuff than actually someone who's doing the work. I've only ever visited one frontline user, and that was the one in Zimbabwe, or one in Zimbabwe. So I'm very hands-off about this. I think my role is to provide the tools and let other people do what they want to do. I think it's quite distinct among some of the other approaches I see where you get teams of white guys flying all over the place installing stuff. And they leave and they wonder why there's no local ownership. Every FrontlineSMS user has reached out and downloaded the software themselves, installed it themselves, figured it out for themselves, got the local numbers, sent messages themselves. And there's a huge amount, as I think you saw with Linda Bacalor, there's a huge amount of satisfaction if you can build something that actually creates an environment that does that. So I keep away from the implementations pretty much the whole time. But they're good points, and maybe ones to ask the end users. I'll go here.
See, are there physical limits on the number of SMS that can come out of a cell phone attached to one of these laptops? So if someone has a network of 2,000, is that going to be the limit, or is it going to be
Yeah, there's definitely technical issues with a cell phone attached to a computer. So the GSM standard, the way you actually make the whole thing work, you can probably send about 8 texts a minute maximum through one phone.
Say that again.
8 SMSs a minute. There's about 8-9 seconds per SMS to get through. The phone it's not because of the software, it's just the phone has to do various bits of handshaking and things have to happen. So there is a...
Is that interrupted by incoming messages?
No. I mean, it works the same way as it works with you having your phone in your hand. If you're texting somebody and someone texts you, it just comes in. But what you can do with FrontlineSMS is you can add multiple devices. So if you get a USB hub with 10 ports, you can plug 10 phones in, and then you can do 80 in there. That starts to become a little bit more manageable. On the receive side, it really depends on, again, how many devices you have and how expensive or how smart the phone is. Because phones generally fill up with SMSs, our software takes them off, then the phone gets emptied and the network sends the next lot. So it's done that way. If the phone's too cheap, it might only hold 20 at a time. If it's a smartphone, it can hold 300 or 400. So that can speed that up. But we also support internet services. If you do happen to have the internet where you're using the software, you can tap into Ticketel or IntelliSMS and those types of services that allow you to send 20,000 messages in a matter of minutes and cheaper. So we do allow for that. The reason it's obviously not ideal with the phone, it's just how it is, and either you do it that way or you don't do it at all. Yeah.
I was wondering how much SMS costs in these areas, is how prohibitive is it, especially when you're talking about when you're making that, let's say, lots of text, so does that become a barrier for people to use it?
I think if you're sending large numbers, it's definitely a barrier, and that's what we're trying to do with this new site next year, is to figure out how we can help subsidise those messages for users. If you're receiving messages, if you're doing election monitoring, or you're basically sucking information or crowdsourcing information, there's no cost. The United States has the amazing privilege of being the only country in the world where you pay to receive texts. And I think people should complain big time and march on Capitol Hill because it's disgraceful. It's really, really bad. So in the Nigerian election monitoring case, they received about 10,000 observations over the weekend, and it cost them nothing. In fact, the project probably cost them maybe $20 to buy the phone. But yeah, a limit who's maybe sending 20 messages a week or 30 a week has to pay for those. The average cost, it varies widely. In India, messages are very cheap. In some African countries, they can be quite expensive. But maybe average is about 5 cents an SMS.
Is that, I'm just wondering, at that price point, with someone like on the crowd side, would that be prohibitive for them to send something if it costs them 5 cents to make a data point?
Well, you need to motivate people to actually engage in election monitoring, for example. So if I only have $1 credit on my phone and someone's asking me to send an observation about how I felt about voting, I'm going to think twice about maybe sending that text. But if I feel that that genuinely empowers me and gives me a voice and helps further my country in its quest for democracy, I will probably do that. And the report that Nigerians produced after the election monitoring process was really interesting because many Nigerians did feel that they were actually able to take their participation in the election a step further, not just by voting, but also by reporting things that they saw. And they definitely saw it worthwhile. But, you know, it's a distributed cost. If you have 10,000 people crowdsourcing information, it's one text each. And that's much more manageable, I think, than obviously one person sending 10,000.
I think it seems what's really cool about this software is that you're able to recognize a need. You design a very quickly, very simple software to sort of match that need. But then there's the interaction. You're trying to reduce sort of the technical usage, while a lot of places they have more development, sort of infrastructure going on. And I'm wondering about what's your thought about the interaction between getting to understand what are the new needs coming up, how can you know what really is needed further to be developed? Because it's really easy to be saying, oh, this would be cool, this would be cool. But what's really cool about that is that it met a need that was, out there.
Right. Well, that's a really good question. The software's been around for 4 years. We're about to release a new version in a couple of weeks, which is always very scary. Every new feature we've added in 4 years has been asked for by the users. So we can do all sorts of really cool stuff. We could do a little module that does a big keyword cloud of all the messages that have come in and tells you which words are texted the most. And that'd be wonderful. I'd love to see it. But no one's asked for it. So I'm not going to waste my time building it just because it's cool. It's the same with sort of iPhone apps and this type of thing. You can do really, really great stuff, but our target audience don't have access to that technology, so we keep away from it. So the functionality we built in and the MMS, picture messaging, which people asked for, we've also added some functionality to the new version that will allow web servers to interact with the software. A lot of people are building websites and they want to send messages through FrontlineSMS, and the previous version, or the current version, doesn't do that. Additional language support currently is in about 8 languages, Arabic through to French, Spanish, Portuguese, Swahili, and all done by users who basically say, can we have it in our language? And the way the software is written, we just send them a text file, they translate the words, they send it back, we just get a little flag of their country, we throw it in, and it's done. Someone's doing Farsi at the moment, I think, as well. So, we're basically working pretty much driven by user demand. And that's our measure. The more people ask for something, the more we know want it. But the core product still remains very, very basic. It's a two-way messaging hub. And it allows you to send group messages out and get messages back. And you can do auto-replies. A certain word comes in, it can kick out an automatic reply. You can have people joining and unsubscribing from SMS lists through the software. If you have the internet, the software can post the incoming message to a website for you. It can be a live ticker across the screen, live from Afghanistan or live from wherever, and those messages could be real-time messages from the field. It will email messages to you if you want to have the messages that come in emailed to a research group who are trying to monitor traffic. So you can do those things if you have that functionality available to you, i.e. the internet. But if you don't, it doesn't stop you from using it. So we'll continue to be user-driven. I'm not interested in building stuff that people don't want, because I could easily go and just do something else with my time.
People then compare you with Twitter sometimes?
Well, you can do Twitter-style functionality, well, the way Twitter used to work. You can do that with FrontlineSMS. If you had a group of 20 people who are maybe monitors monitoring an election or monitoring a demonstration, if one of them texts in a keyword you predefined, FrontlineSMS will automatically send that message to the other 19. So it's a closed Twitter without needing the web or anything like that. So you can do Twitter-style things. In Iran, during the height of the problems recently, there was some interest in using it there, but the trouble is everything has to go through the operator. So the message center records everything, and there's no way around that. So clearly there's danger. People have already been tried now and sent away for long periods of time because they did stuff that they supposedly should not have done. So it wasn't used in Iran. But maybe, there's one thing.
Judging from your presentation, Accent Software, I was wondering about congratulations, but are there competing competitors for software, and what are the positive and minus that you can see? Maybe this also on two directions you are going to give for the development program.
In terms of competitors is sort of it's a dirty word, I guess, if you're trying to create social change, we shouldn't be competing for social change. Well, I know what you meant by that.
But you want to be rich, so you have.
Well,
Maybe parallel software.
yeah, there are other messaging hubs out there. Some are tied to specific phones or specific technologies. Some require the web to actually work at all. And of course, many of the people I work with, I know it's a dream to be able to get on the web. So I would say, quite comfortably, there's nothing quite like this. There are things that touch on it, but there's nothing quite so technically low in terms of a barrier to entry. And in terms of making something immediately usable, I often ask myself, and in fact I was doing it today, if there was an epidemic or there's a mass outbreak of Ebola in Uganda now, what could we deploy right now that would actually potentially help figure out where that was and allow people to report stuff? And a lot of stuff, there's a lead time to deploying it because it requires a day or two of installation, it requires a server, it requires training, all that kind of thing. It's deliberately kept away from all of that. So I think there's not really much, unfortunately, I wish there was, because I still think, like I did 4 or 5 years ago, that long tail right at that end there, that green space where you've got these scrappy non-profits and these people working out of their bedroom who are planning the next revolution. They don't have access to all the stuff that a big NGO has, and I think it's important that we don't forget them. But sadly, I don't see a lot of stuff that's built to work. There's a lot of excitement around Android, for example, right now. Well, I don't think there's any Android phones anywhere in the places where I've been. They just don't exist. So, okay, great, in 3 or 4 years, you can do great health stuff with an Android phone. Or people can take pictures and report human rights abuses and take video and do all sorts of fancy stuff. Well, great, I think that would be fantastic. But today, people want to do stuff today. And that's what most of the NGOs, I think, that come to me, they say, what can we do now? What can we do tomorrow? Like, don't want to wait 5 years until we can afford a $500 phone. What can we do today? And there aren't enough people concentrating in that area, I don't think. I wish there were. I wish there were 10 FrontlineSMS equivalents. Okay, one question.
I was actually going to ask you a similar question. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you made in Google in Uganda with an SMS platform that allows you to search for agricultural prices and agricultural questions and health-related questions? Have you guys worked with them? Because it seems there's a lot of crossover in this space.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, to what extent are you guys collaborating, and is there a real competition there, or is it much more about collaboration? And have you talked to major cell phone providers in Africa about providing discounted texts for people that want to use Frontline SMS?
Right. Great question. Well, the answer to the first one, when Ground started their app lab work in Uganda, I was actually at Stanford, and they contacted me because they found me on the web somewhere. And they sent me out there for a month to start that project up. So the work I did at the very beginning in Kampala was to do a landscape analysis. What kind of information do people need? What are the local issues? What are the big problems? What are the big challenges? Where does the data live? What kind of form does it live in? Is it electronic? Is it on paper? Is it in someone's head? All those sorts of questions. I spent a month there. I went out 1 or 2 other times for focus groups, and then they did the rest of the work with Google. Google were a major partner in that. So I do collaborate. I'm still consulting with them, kind of in a very informal way. And they use FrontlineSMS during rapid prototyping of those services. It's actually great to be there. We had a FrontlineSMS hub in the MTN office in Kampala, and a whole bunch of us went out to the Matatu stands where all the people were waiting for buses, and we said, text any agricultural question you've got. And we had an agricultural expert in the MTN office who was actually pretending to be a computer. But these people text these questions in, they got a reply within 2 minutes. And we're trying to assess how people felt about that and ask them questions. Say, would you pay 10 shillings for this and that? I remember the first ever question actually was, can you get malaria from mangoes? And I thought it was a really funny question. And it turns out that actually, because mosquitoes tend to sit on the mangoes early in the morning and suck off the dew, the people thought that malaria was going into the mangoes from the mosquitoes. So, a little extra bit there for you. In terms of the collaboration stuff, yeah, definitely working with Grameen, been in touch with Google a few times and things. Also, in terms of working with the operators, I'm working with the GSM Association in my next project, when I mentioned the platform. Because if you want to get operators in developing countries or anywhere to get on board into the sort of social change train, you need to prove there's value in them doing that. They're making a lot of money right now, so you need to balance that with that. The GSM Association is the kind of representative body, and they can get all those operators into a room anytime. So for me, they're the ones to work through. There are some people who are picking up a stink and trying to name, shame, and embarrass operators into lowering prices, and I don't think that's necessarily the right way to do it. So next year, hopefully, we'll start to be able to lower prices for FrontlineSMS users initially, but then more broadly, hopefully, for other people. I'm going to go this way in a second now. Yes, sorry.
Just wanted to ask a question. Because just now you showed a slide on collaboration. Now, how does, I didn't quite get how FrontlineSMS and like the vision for how FrontlineSMS can further collaboration. There's no second thing, like places, let's say text messaging, it's not common. Are we thinking, is this FrontlineSMS points somewhere along the line?
So the collaboration question, you're saying you don't quite see where the collaboration is? Or?
How do you see FrontlineSMS helping collaboration in all these places? Now, how can you best ensure collaboration using like tools such as SMS and stuff?
Right, well, I think that there are many things that my software is not good at. And people ask me, if you go to the online forum, you'll see people talking about sending 1 million messages during the Philippine elections. I would never send 1 million messages through an attached cell phone. You'd have to be mad and have a lot of money. So we say that you need to go to an operator, you need to do this. So what I find in terms of the collaboration is that when people come to us, they want to kind of demystify mobile. They want to do something where they live and they want to understand how our software works and other options available to them. And we'll help them as much as possible. Ideally, most users won't need any help. But we'll collaborate with them if they need help and want to collaborate with us on running a project. Most, thankfully, don't do that. That slide was more about just the general ecosystem of ICT for development, where people are saying, our tool is much better than this tool. And in fact, tools generally live along different places on the long tail. There's stuff that's being built. You look at Voxiva do some very good stuff with health, and it's web-based, and the Rwandan Health Ministry use it to monitor HIV/AIDS, drugs compliance, and all sorts of stuff. Our software can never do that. Yet, their software would not work in a mud hut in rural Uganda. So, I think we have to be clear about the strengths and weaknesses of different tools, and we need to make sure that we actually support each other. If my tool's not right, I point people to tools that are right, and don't try to force people. I would freak if I thought someone was trying to send 1 million messages to my software. It would scare me. And I was scared that Nigerian elections weekend, because there were people relying on that, and it's not a nice feeling. You think there might be a bug in the software somewhere. And the second point was, for voice, yes. Someone in India is looking to build a voice module, but I have no idea what that looks like or sounds like, because you can't search voice, and there's a whole bunch of challenges around how if you have one phone attached to a laptop and someone makes a phone call to send a message or listen to a message, that line's engaged. 1,000 people can send an SMS all at once, and the network will handle that, and you'll get them eventually. But with voice, if you have a helpline and it's one phone, you can only help one person at a time. And if I ring 5 times and it's engaged 5 times, I'll give up. So I don't know how it will work, so it's a tricky one, but it's a good point. Last 2 then, please? Or are we doing time?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so there.
I was wondering if you've seen any interesting usages of like syntax, like stuff was on Twitter, thinking, a lot of users came up with a lot of the syntax that naturally recognizes, like the accent or recognizes the investment. So I was wondering if you see anything like that among users, any sort of like movement towards interesting things that might be able to be parsed or anything like that? Is that a quick question?
Not really. I mean, we don't see any of the messages that get sent. So, I get quite a lot of students now saying, can we do research on FrontlineSMS because it's really exciting, and we look at the messages? Well, you can, but you've got to contact everyone else because it's their messages. I think that's the strength of the software, actually, that the messages are locally and we have nothing to do with it. So there may well be some stuff going on that we're not aware of. We do get users who just get in touch with us because something's gone on with their computer and they're freaking out because they can't use the software for some reason and they use it every single day and it's their lifeline. And I've never heard from them, and I find out they downloaded it a year ago. And I wish some users would tell us, be a little bit more forthcoming with their use. The Afghanistan one's a great example. It's been used there for a year without me even knowing, until the laptop crashed and I had to reinstall it, and they needed a new copy. And I'm like, my God, you're using this every day. They're panicking like mad, as you'd expect, and they're using this thing every day to tell their staff where to go and where to be safe. And like, why don't you just tell us that? So that's information we really need, but I'm sure there's stuff happening we're not aware of like that.
So just on the last point, build a call home module to report back just basic user counts or something like that. I think a lot of people would be happy to get things to that, where they wouldn't want you to have the kill switch.
Right.
But my question was, for your end user, your broadcast model is really interesting to me because it seems most effective in terms of a many-to-one functionality, especially the way rates are set with the rest of the world, where it's free for the NGO who's crowdsourcing that.
Yeah.
It makes it challenging to create an engagement loop unless you have a different modality like radio or something to get that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the more successful you are, the more expensive it becomes to actually re-engage. Are you seeing any other approaches besides radio where the re-engagement loops so that you can create a community and create ongoing engagement with that kind of radio? I asked the question because I think that's really vital to creating lasting social change.
Yeah, well, I think prices coming down will also be a great help for that. That will happen eventually. We're not seeing a huge amount other than radio, at least in the stuff that's coming to us. Because, we, being the kind of gatekeepers of the core product, we get some really interesting people coming to us. For example, Bill Simon, who was the first director of NPR, and a McCarthy genius, an amazing guy. He's been doing radio stuff for years, 20, 30 years. He's now really excited about this because it opens up a channel. And I never really thought about that too much. And again, the user coming to us and saying, hey, we can use this for radio. And I'm like, wow, yeah, great. A bit like the health stuff and the other things. So I've not seen anything because no one's really approached us in any way to kind of ask about how that might happen. The only thing I know of that might be remotely related is Kukutana in Zimbabwe. I've got a thing called Freedom Phone. Dial-up radio, it used to be called. Knight Foundation are funding it. And it's an IVR voice system, going back to that voice question earlier, where people can dial in and actually press 1 for the nearest demonstration, press 2 to get latest news, press 3 for something else, and also leave messages based on what's happening where they are. But there's costs to doing that, and setting up interactive voice recognition is a nightmare. So it becomes technically challenging. So I think the technical barriers to doing some of this stuff. Radio is just a natural fit because it's very immediate, but that's not always anything else.
The challenge that I see with radio is that it requires people to have both a cell phone and a radio,
right? And
then you can tune in and know where to be listening to the back channel.
Yeah. Well, Nokia have released phones lately, and it's getting more and more common to have a FM radio on your phone.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, they released, I think about 6 months ago, released a whole bunch of $25 phones with radios. So you can actually have a radio on the phone and then text. So there's some really interesting convergence of radio technology, mobile phones, torches, web, games, and also Nokia Life Tools, which is Nokia's sort of suite of information for farmers and healthcare workers. They just released some phones in Indonesia this week based on Nokia Life Tools. It basically has, within the phone as standard, it allows you to get agricultural information or health information or learn English or do other stuff like that. So a lot of organisations and manufacturers of mobile phones in particular are getting really quite savvy on what we need to add to phones to sell, because 4.5 billion people have phones now, and 1.5 billion don't. And those 1.5 billion are primarily poor. So how do you make a phone appealing? Well, adding a radio is pretty appealing. So that's why it's so interesting at the bottom of the pyramid. There's this big scramble to build stuff that works. So yeah, you have a radio with a loudspeaker, and loudspeakers use mobile phones. So you have 20 people drinking beer with a radio on.
Nice.
Yeah. blogged about it a little while ago. There'll be CD players on phones next. Sorry. I'd like to see you get up and down. Any more questions?
Well, I would like to, in closing, echo the obviously heartfelt sentiment of the doctor in the Philippines. Thank you, Ken Banks.